Good
I'm
morning.
well. How are you?
Yeah, nice to see you again.
You too.
Hello, everyone. Good
Hello.
morning.
Good morning.
It's Bobby
Hey,
from
Bobby.
Indonesia. Hi. Hi, James.
Morning.
Morning.
Good to see you.
Hello, good morning from Laos.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's nice to see you. To see the delegation from Laos.
Yes,
Thank you. For
we are
being
also very happy to see you again and again. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'm Mamun from Malaysia.
Hello, Malaysia.
Hello, Pak
How are
Mamun.
you?
Yeah, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Yeah, okay.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Dr. Yan Ranby, right? I just see you on the screen.
Good morning from Indonesia, Marzuki
Good
Darusman.
morning. Good morning.
Halo, Pak Marzuki. Apa kabar, Pak?
Halo, Waalaikumsalam.
So I think we will start our webinar now. I hope that you all attend the webinar. So can you turn on the camera? Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Your Excellency, Honorable Kitchi Sethabindit Cheam Yeap, First Vice President of the National Assembly of the Kingdom of Cambodia, President of AIPA National Group, distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, on behalf of the Secretariat of the ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, I have a great pleasure to extend to all of you my warmest greetings and best wishes for the Lunar New Year, the Year of Tiger, which is believed to bring about new beginnings, new changes, and encourage people to overcome all challenges and difficulties, which is particularly important at this stage. Warmly welcome all of you to the AIPA ICCF joint virtual briefing on the growing challenge of confronting fishery crime in ASEAN. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start our webinar, I'm very honored to give you a good news that a few days ago, AIPA and ICCF just signed the Memorandum of Understanding to further cooperate on natural resource governance and conservation issues at the policy-making level. This is a concrete step to implement the resolution adopted at the 41st AIPA General Assembly in 2020. Distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, you are all aware that ICCF support the International Conservation Caucus, the largest bipartisan caucus in the US Senate and the House of Representatives. The ICCF advanced leadership in international conservation by raising conservation awareness among policymakers and specifically addresses the global issues of wildlife trafficking, forestry, illegal fishing, and marine debris. Ladies and gentlemen, I highly appreciate the topic of our joint briefing today. We acknowledge that Southeast Asia is among the world top producers of fish and fishery products. Fishery around the world and in this region have been increasing suffering from illegal exploitation, which undermines the sustainability and marine living resources and threatened food security, as well as economic, social, and political stability of coastal states. In recent years, public and political awareness of these issues has increased, and a consensus has emerged on the need for countries to join in efforts to combat illegal, unreported, and unregulated, what we call IUU fishing. The issues now feature prominently on the international political agenda. Particularly, the UN General Assembly recognized the ending of IUU fishing as one of its universal, indivisible, and integrated targets of the Sustainable Development Goals. Ladies and gentlemen, the illegal exploitation of marine living resources include not only fishery crime, but also involves other international organized crime to fisheries sectors, such as corruption, money laundering, fraud, human or drug trafficking. Given the complexity of this crime and the fact that they occur across supply chains of many countries, international cooperation and coordination between countries and agencies is absolutely essential to effectively tackle such illegal crimes. International regional instruments as well as legislative frameworks at the national level are key tools to combat this type of crime. In this slide, several actors, including AIPA member parliaments, have sought to improve their domestic regulations while advocating multilateral and bilateral actions to promote stronger governance over IUU fishing. I'm confident that this joint briefing today creates a platform for parliamentarians in ASEAN and also the Observer Parliament of AIPA to effectively share information on best policy, best practices, and coordinations of action against IUU fishing. I'm very glad to see the participation of not only AIPA member parliaments, but also some observer parliament. I especially would like to warmly welcome our two distinguished panelists who joined this AIPA webinar for the first time, Dr. Masuki Zarusman, Chair and co-founder of the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards, and Dr. Yan Ranbi, founder and CEO of IR Concealum. We are looking forward to hearing your presentation on this topic very soon. Finally, I wish the webinar great success. Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, next in the program, I would like to invite Mr. James Wood, the Indonesia Country Director of ICCF, to deliver remarks. James, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Well spoken. We are very excited about the Memorandum of Understanding as well on our end, and we hope that it can help all of the AIPA parliamentarians across the ASEAN region. Again, my name is James, and as said, I'm the Indonesia Country Director for ICCF. Again, ICCF welcomes everyone here today, including our honored guests from AIPA parliaments and distinguished speakers. At ICCF, we build caucuses and parliaments around the world that have the goal to improve natural resource governance. These caucuses will implement policies for the benefit of the environment, the wildlife, and the communities who not only rely on these precious natural resources, but want to have their children rely on them for generations to come. It almost goes without saying, but the maritime sector in Southeast Asia is essential to the region's economic growth and national security by providing jobs, food security, and sustained revenue. Let there be no doubt, ASEAN countries are at the frontiers of the blue economy. Many scientists and researchers agree that the health of our oceans is critical for the long-term viability of all life on Earth. The many seas of Southeast Asia are among the most biodiverse on the planet, but they are highly vulnerable to threats like pollution, IUU fishing, and fisheries crime. The region's maritime sector, in spite of many of the advantages and benefits provided by the ocean, is prone to severe criminal activity, both opportunistic and organized. As we'll hear from our speakers, this criminal activity, which is increasingly, if not permanently transnational, represents a serious threat to the biodiversity of the region and to those living in the region, including their livelihoods. These same criminals engaging in fisheries crime are often involved in other illegal activities, such as money laundering, tax and customs evasion, corruption, and human trafficking. According to ILO, or the International Labor Organization, forced labor in the fisheries sector is frequently linked to other forms of transnational organized crime, and the fisheries are often vulnerable to physical, sexual violence, overtime, debt bondage, and deception, just to name a few. Although these challenges are intertwined, it is crucial to identify those who commit the offenses on the water and those who profit from those criminal activities and respond appropriately. Combating each challenge would require cooperative work and coordinated response among different government agencies and authorities. It is essential that we use all the tools at our disposal to improve our intelligence gathering of the operations of criminal groups in the fisheries sector and the wider maritime domain. This will require closing gaps between law enforcement and the fisheries industry while demonstrating the value of positive relationships between governments, their constituents, and the fisheries and local communities. One potential conservation solution, which ICCF is specialized in, has been proposed the Marine 30 by 30 initiative, which seeks to protect 30% of the ocean resources by 2030. MPAs, or marine protected areas, are the primary vehicles for reaching this goal. MPAs limit the amount of fishing that can be done within their boundaries, creating important pockets of biodiversity that then, due to the nature of the ocean, will spread to areas open for commercial use. This has shown success in ASEAN countries and some islands in the Pacific as well. More than 100 countries have also committed to this 30 by 30 target, many of them ASEAN nations. This is just one of many initiatives being undertaken to address the critical challenge facing the seas of Southeast Asia. Today, I look forward to hearing more from AIPA members and our expert speakers about the full scope of the fisheries crime threat, the best practices to prevent and confront fisheries crime through legislation, regulation, and how parliamentarians can be empowered through collaborations with stakeholders to empower their blue economies. By working together to address maritime national threats regionally, nationally, and internationally, Southeast Asia's policymakers can secure the economic, food, and national security of the region's peoples. For this and their future generations. Truly, conservation is for the people. And with that, Madam Secretary General, I return the floor to you.
All right. Thank you, James. Distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, I have a great pleasure now to invite Honorable Kitty Sethabindi Cheam Yeap, first Vice President of the National Assembly of the Kingdom of Cambodia and President of Cambodia AIPA National Group, to deliver opening speech. Honorable Cheam Yeap, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, all of you. Honorable delegates from AIPA members, Parliament, and AIPA observers. Madam Nguyen Thu Van, Secretary General of AIPA, representative from the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, it is my great pleasure to welcome distinguished delegates from AIPA Member Parliament, AIPA observers, representative from the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to the virtual briefing on the growing challenge of confronting fishery crime in ASEAN. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the AIPA Secretariat and International Conservation Caucus Foundation for jointly organizing today's virtual briefing. I would also like to express my sincere thanks to all AIPA Member Parliament, AIPA observers, and representatives from various organizations for your active participation in this important event. This event surely, it is a great platform for all AIPA members and distinguished participants to share views and good practices, as well as discuss critical fishery-related issues, which serve as important inputs for combating the common regional issues of fishery crime. Fishery crime is a multifaceted phenomenon which consists of various crimes that are committed at any point along the whole fishery value chain in the fishery industry. Broadly speaking, these crimes include fraud in fishery, economic crime in fishery, and human rights abuses. There are common emerging regional issues that require collective and regional effort and action to effectively address these pressing problems and the related ones. We have recently noticed the increasing challenges in Southeast Asia's maritime sector especially concerning the fishery industry, where crime become more organized and transnational. Corruption, money laundering, tax and custom evasion, human trafficking, labor exploitation, and human rights abuse and ecosystem depletion resulting from the illegal practices in the fishery industry have posed a major threat to national security and economic development for all affected countries. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude today's discussion on how to combat the fishery and related crime, I wish to offer my humble thought as follows: strengthening international cooperation, utilizing both regional and bilateral cooperation and reinforcement in the fight against the growing fishery crime in the fishery industry. Enforcing effective laws and regulations. This refers to law and regulation that are well equipped with extraterritorial reach and to punishment embedded with minimum sanctions. Enhancing cooperation in law enforcement, in investigation, coordinated transnational response is required to fight against the fishery crime, as it is difficult for a country alone to enforce both domestic and international law without cooperation from other countries due to the transnational character to the crimes. I am convinced that we will learn about the governance and instrument needed to combat the fishery crime, and AIPA parliamentarians are empowered to make a legal tool to safeguard the blue economies that are being under threat. With inputs to be received from the discussion today, we can join hand and widen our collaboration with all stakeholders to address the common issues of fishery activity. To conclude, I would like to express my deep gratitude to distinguished delegates from AIPA member parliament, AIPA observers, representatives from International Conservation Caucus Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, for your active participation, support, and close cooperation. I wish our video briefing on the growing challenge of confronting fishery crime in Asean a great success and the best of outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Cheam Yeap. Next in the program, I'd like to invite all distinguished parliamentarians and participants to watch the pre-recorded video of speech by Representative Edward Case, a member of the United States Congressional Ocean Caucus. Thank you very much.
As we say in my home state of Hawaii, and on behalf of my colleagues in Congress, and especially those of my fellow members of the Ocean Caucus in both the House and the Senate, aloha. I first want to thank AIPA President, His Excellency Heng Samrin, and Secretary General Van for allowing me to address this webinar on a critical topic devastating our oceans across the world. I deeply appreciate AIPA's careful and considered approach to confronting the rise in fisheries crimes. Your organization's focus to date on such key topics as disaster management, a zero-tolerance mindset against illicit drugs, and building relationships with allies such as the European Parliament are all highly relevant. Fisheries crime is also an illicit practice that is complicating our efforts to maintain our stocks of fish, a key source, of course, of animal protein consumed across our world. Fisheries stocks in danger of depletion due to overfishing is a disaster of a different kind, with huge implications for food security, which the United Nations lists as critical to its 17 Sustainable Development Goals for the year 2030. And I applaud you for your efforts to reach out to your partners as well as potential allies, to exchange ideas and develop policies and agreements to take on the challenges we all face now and into the future. I want to assure AIPA that Congress shares your concerns with the challenge of rising fisheries crimes, and we stand with you to take on this challenge, as evidenced by recent measures that have come before us for our consideration and action. Just last week, I joined my colleagues in the U.S. House to pass what is considered a once-in-a-generation legislation that includes many provisions I supported with my colleagues to address fisheries crimes. This legislation, referred to broadly as the Competes Act, focuses on domestic and national security interests for my country. But the Act also includes provisions in my own measure, the Boosting Long-Term U.S. Engagement in the Pacific, referred to as the Blue Pacific Act. The aim of the Blue Pacific Act is to develop a comprehensive, long-term U.S. strategy across the Pacific Island region, with provisions to increase U.S. security cooperation and assistance to address regional maritime security, transnational crime, and law enforcement issues, including illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU. Our Competes Act also includes a number of other strong provisions to protect our world's oceans and to curb abuses by those who profit from IUU fishing. To further underscore the efforts of my country to deal with these crimes, just last November, Congress enacted and President Biden signed into law our country's critical legislation on policies and guidance for our Defense Department for the year. The National Defense Authorization Act included what is referred to as the Sullivan White House provision, both of them United States senators, that focuses on cracking down on pirate fishing. The provision calls on the Secretary of the Navy to produce a report on maritime security measures related to IUU. Other pieces of legislation include a measure that came a few days later after I introduced my Blue Pacific Act, the Honoring Oceania Act, sponsored in the Senate by my Hawaii colleague, Mr. Schatz, and others, as well as the push by my Natural Resources Committee in the House to reauthorize our country's major legislation on fishery conservation and management, the Magnuson-Stevens Act. These are further evidence to show my nation's commitment to protect our fisheries, both domestic and the high seas, and to show our willingness to engage in the Pacific and work with our allies and friends to confront and deal with this and other challenges facing our fisheries. In closing, I wish AIPA and all of you in attendance my sincere best wishes for a most successful event. Please know that you have ready and committed partners in the U.S. Congress for the critical work we all face. Aloha, be well and be safe.
Thank you, Representative Edward Case. Ladies and gentlemen, before we start the second session on the presentation of expert panelists, now I would like to invite all AIPA member parliaments and observer parliament to introduce your delegation. Due to the time constraint, I encourage each delegation have maximum 1 minute to speak. May I start now with Cambodia? Cambodia, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good morning. I thank you very much, Honorable Nguyen Tung Wan. You are both Mr. James Watt and His Excellency Dr. Cheam Yeap are highly appreciated for your warm and meaningful welcome and keynote speech. In accompanying to the first Vice President of National Assembly of the Kingdom of Cambodia, Excellency Dr. Cheam Yeap, the President of Cambodia AIPA National Group. The Cambodia delegation is led by myself, MPT Sukun, the Secretary of Fifth Commission on Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation, Media and Information, followed by Honorable MP Q. Pirret, Secretary for 7 Commission on Education, Youth, Sport, Culture, and Tourism, and Honorable PM MP Son Sarana of the 3rd Commission on Planning, Investment, Agriculture, Water Resource, and Rural Development, and our advisor, His Excellency Srundara. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Cambodia. As the president of AIPA this year, I highly appreciate very active contribution and participation of Cambodia delegation in all AIPA activities so far. So thank you very much, Cambodia. Now I have a great pleasure to invite Indonesia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Min. Good morning. My name is Babe Rizaldi. I'm representing the House of Representatives Republic of Indonesia on behalf of my friend in Ocean Caucus. I'd like to introduce briefly my colleagues that attend this morning. First of all, thank you to Mr. James Ward and Mr. Tai Sokun and other participants that already joined this meeting this morning. Today, I have my colleague here, Mr. Dev Laksono. It's the same commission with me in Commission 1 that representing the Defense, Intelligence, and Maritime Security. And also here, Ms. Diah Roro from Commission 7 that deal with the energy sector, and also Ms. Alien Mus from the Commission 4 that for Fishery Ministry, and I think so we still have more to join. There's Mr. Budi Jiwandono from Commission 4 also, and Ibu Lulu Nurhamida and Ibu Farida Hidayati. Thank you. And we hope that today's discussion will be fruitful and will be benefit for us and to give us more reference to make other legislation that relevant to these topics. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to know that today the Indonesians Parliament sent a very big group of MPs, 9 MPs from the Ocean Caucus. Of the House of Representatives of Indonesia. So, so welcome all of you to joining this webinar. Thank you, Indonesia. Next, I would like to invite Lao PDR. You have the floor, Lao.
Okay, good morning. Myself, Surapon Intawong, member of National Assembly, and beside me, Mr. Kamtan Tatawong, Director of the Economic, Technology and Environment Committee of Lao National Assembly. Nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite Malaysia. Malaysia, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you, Madam Secretary. So my name is Mamun bin Sulaiman. I'm a member of a special select committee for fisheries for Parliament of Malaysia. So actually, I am in Tawau, the eastern part of Malaysia, neighboring Indonesia. So my close neighbor Indonesia is Nunukan Tarakan, Kaltara, Kalimantan Utara, Northern Kalimantan. So we are very excited to hear that you are shifting your capital city to Kalimantan very soon. So thank you very much. Maybe we are anticipating great opportunity, the collaboration Indonesia-Malaysia, especially in Asian region. So thank you very much. Hope we have a fruitful and beneficial briefing today. So we are looking forward for the good result. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malaysia. Now I'd like to invite Myanmar. Myanmar, you have the floor. Myanmar, is there anyone from Myanmar? I know that there's no MP from Myanmar, but there is a staff. If the staff from Myanmar is not here, may I invite Vietnam?
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary General. Good morning from Vietnam. My name is Hoài Ho, a parliamentary official from the Foreign Affairs Department of the National Assembly of Vietnam office. It is my great pleasure to be here and to take part in the very first meeting of AIPA in the year of 2022 and to be invited to introduce myself. And on the occasion of Vietnamese Lunar New Year, I wish you all good health and successful webinar today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, as I already informed you that joining this webinar, we also have some observer parliament of AIPA. Now I have a great pleasure to invite Belarus. Belarus, can you introduce yourself? Belarus.
Hello, good morning. My name is Anna Lepeshko, and I'm a principal counselor of the Department of International Cooperation of the Secretariat of the House of Representatives of the National Assembly of the Republic of Belarus. It's a great pleasure for me to take part in this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Belarus. Welcome you to join this webinar. Next, I'd like to invite Canada.
Hi, good morning, or good evening in my case. I'm from Canada. My name's Han Dong, member of Parliament. I'm also a member of the Standing Committee on Industry, Technology, and Public Accounts. I sit as the parliamentary co-chair for the Canada-China Legislative Association. It's my pleasure to join you today for the virtual briefing hosted by Asean and AIPA. I look forward to the fruitful discussion. As you know that there's quite a bit of interest from Canada on the topic that we're talking about. In fact, according to a statement put out by Fisheries and Oceans Canada in 2021, talked about how Canada has advanced its international commitments on combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. For example, through the dark vessel detection program, we use advanced technology to aid island countries and countries in the region to crack down on the IUU fishing. So I look forward to today's discussion, and I want to thank the hosting country for inviting us, and I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of my parliamentary colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada. I'm very excited to have you joining this webinar very far away from Southeast Asia. And we look forward to hearing your input during the Q&A session. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon. I am come from the Timor-Leste as the chairman of the Committee D, Economic and Development. So this is the first time for me to participate in this important event. I'm on my parliament. I want to thank for all of you, and then I will to take this opportunity to hear and more learn from your experience and how to strengthen our cooperation between country to fight and to combat illegal fishing, particularly in Timor-Leste. It's a day we coordinate as 75 illegal boats in our maritime about this. So we hope that Indonesian and other countries support us how to make sure that to protect our maritime. According to our limited capacity that we have, we hope that this opportunity around the world can help us, and from your kindness, we hope you will be support us, and thanks for the important conference. Your invitation is a good opportunity for Timor-Leste to participate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Timor-Leste. Now I'd like to invite Ukraine. Ukraine, you have the floor.
Good morning. I'm glad to see you, every one of you, and we are glad to be an observer in AIPA, and it's so important for us. Thank you. Ukrainian delegation is represented by 2 MPs. Me, Bragar Evgeny, I'm the head of Inter-Parliamentary group of cooperation with Vietnam, and Vadim Khalaychuk. He is chairman of Inter-Parliamentary cooperation group with Malaysia. Also present is worker of Ukrainian embassies in Middle East Asia and another. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ukraine. Welcome you to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, I also would like to inform you that joining this webinar, we also have people from the AIPA Secretariat and the ICCF Secretariat, as you already know. So now, before we turn to the next agenda, I would like to invite all distinguished parliamentarians and participants to join the group photo. So can you turn on your camera? All of you turn on your camera. So my colleague Reski, can you count from 3 to 1 to attract the attention of all people?
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. I will make a countdown to taking the picture. So, right, 3, 2, 1. Once again, please. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's done. Thank you, SG.
Thank you, Reski. Parliamentarians, distinguished parliamentarian, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to start the section 2, and I want to give the floor to Mr. Cheam Yeap, the Indonesia country director of ICCF, to moderate the second session. Cheam, you have a floor. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Secretary General. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited about our expert panel, session 2. Dr. Marzuki Darusman will be our first speaker today. And in the interest of time, we're a little behind, but he has 20 minutes. And so he will speak on human rights and labor in the seafood industry. And Dr. Marzuki, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Pak James. And may I start by wishing all of us a good Lunar New Year for the coming period, and address the forum by thanking Honorable Madam Nguyen Tong Van, Secretary General of AIPA, for the invitation to first. I also recognize the Honorable Kiti Seda Bandit Cheam Yeap, first Vice President of the National Assembly of the Kingdom of Cambodia and President of Cambodia AIPA National Group, and furthermore Dr. Ian Rowdy, founder and CEO of IR Concilium. Again, thank you for the organizers. Good morning, everyone. And it's a great privilege to be part of this discussion, very important discussion. I'm here to represent the foundation first, the Foundation for International Human Rights Reporting Standards and Certification, a foundation that was set up to look into the issue of primarily business and human rights. And by way of delivering a presentation about human rights and labor rights in the fisheries, to highlight some of the issues of the topic. In the presentation, I will highlight the human rights and labor issues in the fisheries industry and present a few cases of modern slavery and human rights violations and explain efforts taken by countries in Southeast Asia to protect human rights in the fisheries industry. Now, the most notable human rights and labor violations in the fisheries include, of course, modern slavery, forced labor, and human trafficking. This will, I think, be further elaborated by colleague speaker, Dr. Ravi. These violations are especially concerning among ASEAN member countries. Governments and NGOs estimate that there are likely at least 17,000 fishers in the waters of Southeast Asia who are considered slaves in the modern sense. The irregular, unregulated, and unreported fishing exacerbates human rights violations in the fisheries industry. The driving forces are the absence of adequate regulatory control over fishers and fishing vessels, and the lack of effective management tools to manage fishing capacity. Now, human rights, labor rights, and labor rights are inseparable, of course, as we know. However, there are some key differences between the two. The difference is that while human rights are rights that are inherent to all human beings, labor rights are entitlements that relate specifically to the role of being a laborer or a worker. The range of the most fundamental rights are, of course, the right to life, until the right to food, education, health, and liberty. On the other hand, labor rights can include a right to work in a job freely chosen, and the right to fair working conditions, and the right to a fair wage. Now, may I just present the core international human rights instruments and the 8 ILO core conventions, just to give you a sense that of the scope of this issue, as was mentioned by the AIPA Secretary General, Madam Wong, that this is a matter of global concern, as evidenced by the attention being given to this issue in terms of the regulatory, UN regulatory framework. And therefore, as I mentioned, human rights and labor rights are indivisible, meaning that they are closely, very much closely linked to each other. Now, there are several types of human rights violations in the fisheries industry with their definitions, of course, although we may not want to go into this, but modern slavery does not have its own legal definition, as I understand it, but it is an umbrella term used to include the forms of exploitation, such as forced labor, human trafficking, the worst form of child labor, slavery and slavery-like practices, and debt bondage. This last one, I think, characterizes the fate of so many fisher folks in the Southeast Asia region. Forced labor means all work or service which is exacted from any person under the menace, threat of any penalty, and for which the said person has not offered himself voluntarily. According to the sorry? No. If I can continue, then human trafficking has 3 elements. First is the act, which includes recruitment, transportation, or transfer of persons. Second is the means used to achieve the act, encompassing things such as violence, coercion, or fraud. This is that it must be for the purpose of exploiting that other person for financial gain or material benefit. Now, the roots of human trafficking and labor rights violations in the fisheries industry relate to such issues as overfishing, IUU fishing, and the sourcing of the workforce from middle and low-income countries, that more relatively low-cost migrant workers are employed by the fisheries sector. Unfortunately, middle to low-income countries often have poor recruitment practices caused by loopholes in existing labor laws and inadequate capacity of labor rights institutions. Most migrant fishers have inadequate skills due to a lack of practical training, like exercises and fishing simulations. Lack of training, inadequate language skills, and lack of enforcement of safety and labor standards make these fishers particularly vulnerable to labor rights violations and human trafficking. The weak enforcement of vessels licensing systems and inadequate capacity to conduct fisheries monitoring, control, and surveillance means that vessels engaged in IUU fishing cause labor rights violations to go unnoticed by the relevant authorities. Now, as you see in the slide, human rights violations in fisheries industry in Southeast Asia have been covered by news articles quite extensively. We can see that news articles about human rights violations in the Southeast Asian fisheries industry are covered by the major newspapers and news outlets. As we can see from the headlines, these human rights issues are found in many ASEAN member countries, which could create negative impacts to a lot of people in Southeast Asia. Some of the articles were published recently, which means that this is still an ongoing issue, very much an ongoing issue in Southeast Asia. To encapsulate the pervasive situation of bondage in this area, I would like to highlight a case study, what known as the Benjina case. Benjina is a place in the vast eastern part of Indonesia, in the Moluccas. And I would like to show that the Benjina case, which illustrates modern slavery in the fisheries industry, is a characteristic of the situation in Southeast Asia. This case occurred in 2015 and was very widespread in the media due to its severity. A brief overview and timeline of the facts of the Benjina case is presented in this quick fact slide. A coverage, investigative coverage by the Associated Press came out with this case. And investigations revealed that, I would just say, an ASEAN member state-owned vessels in the Indonesian island of Benjina enslaved migrant fishers. The fishers were forced to work decades far away from their families against their will and without remuneration. This case emphasizes that the issue of IUU fishing and its associated human rights violations affects the entire Southeast Asian region. The slaves were held in Indonesian territory. The vessels were owned by PT Pusaka Benjina, which is a foreign investment company from Thailand, and the victims were nationals of Myanmar, Indonesia, Laos, and Cambodia. Now, furthermore, there were several human rights and labor rights violations of the fishers in the Benjina case, including the right to fair wages, the rights to safe and healthy working conditions and forced labor, and human trafficking. Regarding forced labor and human trafficking, the fishers were forced to work against their will, and captains trafficked seafarers into situations where they would be exploited. These conditions fall fully within the definition of forced labor and human trafficking in the ILO Forced Labor Convention and the Palermo Protocol. Now, after the incident at Benjina, the Indonesian government ramped up efforts to combat IUU fishing and protect human rights in the fisheries industry. I will just touch on the efforts taken by the Indonesian government to protect human rights in the fisheries industry in the waters of Indonesia. A task force was established to continue identifying and rescuing victims of modern slavery at sea. A presidential task force to combat illegal fishing was issued. And in December 2015, the Minister for Marine Affairs and Fisheries came out with a regulation on system and certification on human rights in the fishing industry. The enactment of this regulation on Fishers' Work Agreement came out also in the same period. Now, let me quickly explain about this regulation. It requires fisheries company to develop human rights policy and develop due diligence and remediation procedures. These three aspects are known as the human rights management system, which is fully elaborated in the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The fishery company's human rights management system shall be certified, and this regulation is applicable to fishing vessels whose permits are issued by the Ministry of Fisheries, or that lease or manage fishing vessels whose permits are issued by the ministry. However, a notable limitation is that it protects Indonesian fishers who work in the maritime territory of Indonesia. It does not grant protection for migrant fishers. Now, in closing, just to touch on the global efforts, since IUU fishing and human rights violations in the fisheries industries are cross-border issues, it requires regional and global efforts by governments and business actors. The adoption and ratification of international conventions such as the Work in Fishing Convention ILO C-188 is essential to protect workers in the fisheries industry. The Work in Fishing Convention covers key aspects of labor rights fishing industry, such as minimum requirements for work on board fishing vessels, adequate conditions on board fishing vessels, and requirements for medical care. The standards of training, certification, and watchkeeping for fishing vessel personnel sets certification and minimum training requirements for crews and fishing vessels to ensure safety and adequate working conditions on board fishing vessels. UN Guiding Principle requires businesses that include those in the fisheries industry to identify the most salient human rights risks of their operations and address the risks. With regard to the regional efforts, since this issue heavily affects ASEAN member countries, ASEAN has worked together on this issue. One of the initiatives is the development of a regional plan of action to promote responsible fishing practices, including combating illegal, unreported, and regulated fishing. Though it does not specifically address human rights issues, however, addressing IUU fishing will reduce the risks of human rights violations in the fisheries industry. In 2019, ASEAN member countries have established an ASEAN IUU fishing network to enhance regional cooperation. Another regional effort is the ASEAN SEAFDEC, Southeast Asia Asian Fisheries Development Center, resolution and plan of action on sustainable fisheries for food security for the ASEAN region towards 2030. This was mentioned earlier by James. This plan of action covers many aspects to achieve sustainable fisheries, including fisheries management and planning and information. Now, the Indonesian Coordinating Minister for Maritime and Investment Affairs and FIRST is currently preparing the annual Southeast Asia Forum on Sustainable Capture Fisheries to be held in Bali in mid-2022. This forum is aimed at bringing together stakeholders, government, business sectors, and civil society in the fishing industries. Now, the challenges, of course, ahead are many, and the most notable is the lack of ratification of key ILO conventions. We could go into that later on. The second issue is the overlapping authorities and harmonized regulations on the authority to manage fisheries creates confusion and leads to non-compliance. This issue is especially relevant In Indonesia, where efforts to protect the labor rights of fishers are conducted by several governmental ministries and institutions. Another major issue is the difficulty to monitor vessels at sea and IUU fishing. Large-scale unreported fishing, because of weak legal oversight, cause billions of dollars in losses to economies and increases the risk of human rights violations. A number of recommendations to close the presentation would be: one, ASEAN member countries should take steps to ratify key international regulations such as the Work in Fishing Convention and the MLC. Governments should develop regulation to mandate human rights due diligence in the fishing industry in line with the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Thirdly, fisheries businesses should develop human rights policy and carry out human rights due diligence. Fourthly, investors also play a key part to protect human rights in the fisheries industry. Investors should consider human rights in their investment decision-making to ensure that they do not invest in companies that cause human rights violations. And lastly, but not the least, are the consumers that can also contribute by placing pressure on fisheries businesses to respect human rights by refusing to buy products from brands which are linked to human rights violations in the fisheries industry. That concludes my presentation, ladies and gentlemen. There may be some issues that have not been brought up in this presentation, but could then be touched on in the dialogue. The major one of which, of course, is that it might not be sufficient to combat crimes in the fishery industry separate from an environmental approach in conserving fish stocks. And then we then touch on the fundamental relationship between human rights and the environment, which could be then looked into and may merit and do require further research into this as to how we should go about in developing a much more comprehensive approach to combating crime in the fishery industry by linking human rights with the overall environmental protection imperative. Thank you very much.
Well, that was excellent, Dr. Marzuki. I completely agree with the comprehensive approach, especially when it comes to the human rights aspect of illegal fishing and fisheries crime. Also, your reference of the Benjina case is well taken. We're planning a field mission to North Maluku with our caucus members from Indonesia, and so we welcome further discussion at that trip. I now turn to the second expert panelist for our second briefing. Dr. Ian, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Go. Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Ward, and I'm absolutely honored to be with all of you. So, distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, I'll stand on the protocols observed before me in the interest of time. But I will say that in my time right now, on the East Coast of the United States, it is still the eve of Valentine's Day. So I wish you all a very happy Valentine's Day, and I share with you what is for me a labor of love. I really am honored to be able to share some of this with you, and I hope that in sharing my screen, you are actually able to see this presentation and to share with me afterwards some of your thoughts on it, because what I want to do is take a few moments to distinguish between three interrelated but distinct legal and operational issues. There is a tendency that we have all, I think, tended to adopt to conflate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU fishing, as anything undesirable in the maritime and fishery spaces. And I think it's really important from a policy standpoint, from a legal standpoint, and ultimately from an operational standpoint, and actually doing something about these issues to disentangle our tendency to use the term IUU fishing from fisheries crime and from a third item of state-protected illicit fishing. So if we look at IUU fishing, and as my predecessor in this panel has just so aptly stated, IUU fishing is fundamentally about sustainability and conservation. We are looking at the illegal use of the fishing sector to harness fish. That is fundamentally different than fisheries crime, which is the illegal use of the fisheries supply chain in its entirety to commit other crimes, be it drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms trafficking, fuel smuggling, meat smuggling, or any kind of financial or money laundering related offense. And that is where we have to be very careful in not just saying that IUU fishing is everything that's undesirable or that fisheries crime is similar to IUU fishing. They are very distinct. One uses the fishing sector to fish, one uses the fishing sector to commit other non-fishing crimes. And I think that is really, really important. And I'll come back to why it's so important to distinguish that from an operational and practical standpoint as I go along. But there's a third issue, and this is really difficult to address in many respects, and that is state-protected illicit fishing. I think that just as the IUU fishing is about sustainability and conservation, fisheries crime is about security and law enforcement, state-protected fishing is about something else, and that is really about sovereignty and geopolitical relations. Yes, it is in many cases also a form of IUU fishing. We are seeing the protection of IUU fishing occurring by states, but fundamentally it is a form of international bullying and a form of diminishing the sovereignty of other states. And we'll come back to each of these in turn. But what I want to do for a few moments is talk through some of the trends we are seeing in IUU fishing, talk about how they apply in the fisheries crime space from an operational standpoint, and then look a little bit about what is happening in the state-protected illicit fishing space, and then what we can do about all of them. Because I think that cooperation between agencies at the national level and between states in fora like this is absolutely vital to safeguarding the common heritage of all mankind, including the abundance of the fisheries and other living marine resources of the oceans, while also protecting life on land. And that nexus between our lives on land and what is happening on the water is critical to understanding how we address these issues, because not only is it sustainability of our oceans, but it's also relieving economic pressures on land and dealing with the rule of law on land. Because ultimately, even though 70% of the earth is covered in water, 100% of the world's population lives on land. And so we are talking about offenses committed by human beings who live on land, go out to sea, and return to the land. And so the place where we can best address a lot of what is happening at sea that is undesirable is on land. And that brings us all into being stakeholders in addressing these issues. So let me look at the distinction between the illegal, the unregulated, and the unreported aspects of IUU. Illegal is very clearly a violation of a national law, be it a regulation or some other administrative law, as well as a formal piece of legislation. That seems very simple, but it is often overlooked, and we often end up calling things illegal that aren't actually illegal because they are sometimes occurring beyond national jurisdiction, or they are not actually encoded in law in any way. And we have to be very precise about this, because one of the things that is occurring more and more is that bad actors are able to manipulate the space because we are imprecise in what we are calling illegal versus something else. Unregulated is really the void that is left by inadequate laws. And so I have a photograph on the bottom right there of a sea cucumber, and that is one of the areas where we are seeing a lack of regulation, most often exploited by criminal actors. Reef species that are actually extremely high value are often those most targeted by criminal groups who recognize the lack of regulation, providing them an opportunity to go after it aggressively. And this is one of the biggest concerns about sustainability. And then unreported fishing may be equally as problematic to sustainability, but it also goes to both a regulatory violation and a concern for the integrity of global supply chains. If there are actors who are taking fish with a license, so it is legal to fish, but not reporting that catch and transshipping at sea and moving it into other countries' supply chains, what we end up seeing is that the states in which the resources are being harnessed are not getting the tax benefit, they're not getting the landing benefit, they're not getting the economic value of their maritime domain, and that is absolutely critical. So what we are seeing are a few trends, and the MV Nika case, which our colleagues from Indonesia should be very proud about, is one of these indicators. I call this a phenomenon of crossover criminal vessels. As we begin to put more attention towards vessels that are engaged in IUU fishing, we see criminal actors taking advantage of blind spots. And one of those blind spots is that nobody expects a general cargo vessel, which is not a fishing vessel, to be engaged in IUU fishing. But in July 2019, the Indonesian authorities, in conjunction with Interpol and Global Fishing Watch, did a tremendous job of interdicting the MV Nika for IUU fishing. And this notion of using non-fishing vessels to fish is becoming a very, very difficult phenomenon, because when we look for fishing vessels engaged in IUU fishing, we are not necessarily paying attention to all the other vessels because we just rule them out. And so this is one of those blind spots that is being exploited more and more. In terms of identities, this is a tactic that we are seeing more and more, not only in IUU fishing, but in fisheries crime. In September 2019, I was actually in Phuket Bay. I took this photograph the day this vessel was arrested. The U-Taiwan, which had previously been known as the Wisdom Sea, was arrested by Thai authorities. When it was arrested, they expected it to be flagged in Honduras, but it was actually flagged in Cameroon. And that Cameroonian registration was unique in that it was one of the first that we saw where, for a single voyage from Cambodia to Bangladesh, this vessel had registered with Cameroon to be a Cameroon flagged vessel for that one and only voyage. And interestingly, the Cameroonian authorities declared that because the vessel was outside of that voyage path, it was stateless as far as they were concerned because they had breached their registration. This is a new area of law, but it's a new area of criminality because we have not really seen or dealt with this previously. But vessel identities are becoming a major problem. Dual use in the fisheries sector for material that could be used for either illegal or IUU fishing, as is the case with ammonium nitrate for blast fishing, is becoming a real problem. And I heard reference to Maluku earlier. West Maluku, East Flores, South Sulawesi, parts of Malaysia are all very critical in the ammonium nitrate and fertilizer supply chains that are not only allowing for blast fishing to occur, but the stockpiling by groups of nefarious intent to be able to have what is fundamentally an explosive material. If anybody is uncertain as to what having a large stockpile of ammonium nitrate may do, look no further than the blast that occurred in Beirut, Lebanon on the 4th of August of 2020. That massive explosion was entirely due to a vessel's cargo of ammonium nitrate that had been sitting since 2013. And so this is an area where we are concerned about the sustainability of the fisheries. We are concerned about IUU fishing practices, but we are also concerned about the potential use of this material for other purposes, be it a terrorist or criminal. But let's look a little bit at some of what is happening in the dynamics of the fisheries fleets that are beginning to not only operate within a region, but across regions. So the same vessels engaged in IUU fishing in Southeast Asia are showing up off of South America. They're showing up in Africa. They have really become a global phenomenon. And these distant water fishing fleets, not just of China, which gets the visibility, but of other states increasingly mimicking that Chinese activity, are a real concern. And what we are seeing are a number of tactics. One is they will use the same name. So, for example, the Zhao Yu 921 is actually two different vessels. One is a Chinese flagged vessel and one is a British flagged vessel. And when the Zhao Yu 921 transships with the Zhao Yu 921, no one notices because it's the same vessel name and number. And that sharing of name is also matched with a great degree of sharing of identities, be it IMO numbers, MMSI numbers, or other indicators of identity. And so this is a growing tactic. We are also seeing a huge amount of transshipment to a single origin set of vessels. So the Fuyuan Yuleng 999 was arrested in Ecuador, having illegally caught species throughout the Galapagos marine protected area. Now, that vessel was not the one catching the fish. It was attached to an entire fleet of vessels that were transshipping onto it. And so that notion of a group of vessels working in conjunction with each other is critical. And so reefers are a major, refrigerated cargo vessels are a major factor in how fleet sustainment occurs for IUU fishing operations to continue. But they can then also be connected to fisheries crime activities, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. And finally, we see tankers also associated with these fleets in order to maintain the fuel so that the vessels can continue operating. Now, if we start looking very closely at some of the tactics, we notice things like dark activity, very bizarre draft changes, drifting and deception. So this is a visualization of two vessel trails. The Minghang 5 is a refrigerated cargo vessel like the Fuyuan Yuleng 999 that has engaged in a lot of activity off of the Galapagos. Now you can see that in 2020, it actually crossed the Galapagos exclusive economic zone illegally. And during that crossing, it exhibited a very bizarre behavior. It changed its length, it changed its draft, and it changed its identity several times. And so over the course of a 10-hour transit, it was registered as being a different length at different times. It was registered as being a different depth at different times. And that is an indicator that there is an attempt to obscure what is actually happening. So what we are beginning to detect is more and more tactics for evading the oversight that is now possible by all the technological advances we've had in a very short amount of time. And so we are seeing more innovation in how IUU fishing tactics can occur. Now, all these tactics are beginning to also start to influence other things. Fisheries crime, as I said, is about not fishing, but doing other things. And so the tactics, though, are replicated because they're often the same vessels that could have been doing IUU fishing, but are now focused on something else. I don't have the time to go into great depth about all of this, but there is no greater concern at this point than the increased use of the fishing sector for other illicit purposes. We are seeing it all over the world, and Southeast Asia, unfortunately, is one of the areas that is seeing the greatest rise in new forms of criminality. Fuel smuggling is a major, major phenomenon. Across the difference of price between different jurisdictions, fuel smugglers can maintain an operation that will net them far, far more money just moving fuel, buying it in one country, smuggling it into another, than they would actually fishing. And that change in economic circumstances to put an emphasis on doing something that's illegal has been something that more nefarious transnational organized crime and terrorist groups have recognized. And so they have realized that fishermen who do not have enough income from actually fishing are susceptible to being used for all kinds of smuggling purposes, be it for drugs, weapons, or other things. And fuel seems very benign, but if you want an example of where it can become the form of building resilience to maintain an attack against a government, look no further than Mindanao and the siege of Marawi beginning on the 23rd of May, 2017. Fuel smuggling operations were so prolific in Mindanao that on the 23rd of May 2017, I was actually in the Filipino Congress testifying about concerns that there was likely to be a terrorist attack because so much of the fuel was in the hands of Abu Sayyaf and criminal actors. And so fisheries crime is not about sustainability, but it impacts our life on land in very profound ways. And it means that what would have been fishers earning an honest living through fishing are now engaged in criminal activity. And once that begins, it is sometimes very difficult to bring them back. And so we need to be very careful not to just completely distinguish fisheries crime and IUU fishing as two totally separate issues. And it is that distinction that has allowed for a lot of the criminal appropriation of money laundering and financial crime to occur. Because if all the law enforcement agencies are focused on countering drug trafficking on fishing vessels, or non-fishing vessels, just any vessel, and all those who are focusing on sustainability only care about whether a fishing vessel is engaged in fishing, there is a natural split between the agencies that can be used to make all kinds of money disappear. So if fishermen are not reporting catch and income, and criminal groups are able to buy up fishing vessels, as we are seeing more and more occur, they can essentially claim any amount of money has come from those fishing vessels, even if they're being used for trafficking drugs, even if they're being used for smuggling fuel. And so this blending of a fisheries and sustainability focused issue and a law enforcement issue is critical to closing what is a very profound blind spot. We have to not look at these as two different things. We have to recognize that fishing vessels operating in the water ought to be seen as a vessel like anything else. And we need to be concerned both about their use for sustainability and their use for criminality. So we can't just look at them as a non-law enforcement issue and a non-sustainability issue. They are both. The last point, though, on state-protected illicit fishing is that we need to really start thinking about the strategic significance of states using their own resources, their own assets, to protect fisheries activity. Now, we see this image is fishing operations around the Galapagos by the Chinese distant water fleet in July and August 2020. That activity is immense. There's a ton of it. And a lot of people immediately jump to say, well, this is IUU, or this is unsustainable, or this is illegal. It isn't necessarily any of those things. But the question is, if we take away the emotion and add some rigor, what is it? Is it strategic presence? Is it something else? And so we need to look at how states, and China is only one of several, that are protecting fishing operations are or are not breaking the law, and what we can or cannot do about them. What we are seeing is, in some cases, to protect IUU fishing or fisheries crime, diplomatic pressure being used, development leverage being used. I will provide you this amount of development funds if you turn a blind eye to some of what's happening on the water. Audible silence, getting called out but saying nothing, doing nothing, and not taking any responsibility. And then even physical protection. And physical protection we have seen particularly acute in the Natuna Sea. The Bakamla very visibly was able to draw attention to the incursion of Chinese Coast Guard vessels into the Indonesian exclusive economic zone in July and August, January and December 2019 and January 2020. And Bintang, the communications officer for Bakamla, photographed there, was embraced as somewhat of a national hero for ordering the Chinese vessels out of the Natuna Sea. But the fact that there were government assets protecting that IUU operation is an indication of how difficult this challenge is becoming. So in response, and this is what I encourage all of us to do, we have to share insights. We need to share what we're seeing, what we're learning. We have to work together on investigations. Most of these supply chain issues, most of these fisheries issues are multinational. And if we are only investigating at the national level, we can't get far enough to actually do something about them. We have to recognize the interconnections between fishers, between transnational organized crime groups, between terrorist organizations, and between nefarious state actors. They are all connected, and increasingly those interconnections are how we are missing some of the opportunities for intervening. we have to apply innovation. We are seeing a lot of innovation in the tactics of illegal actors. We need to be equally innovative in how we combat them. And that leads us to, we have to get out of the water and we have to interdict these things, these incidents. And that means we have to overcome our blind spots. We have to work together at the interagency level and at the international level. That will allow us to interrupt some of these illicit supply chains, these illicit activities, and ultimately make the environment inhospitable to IUU fishing, fisheries crime, and state-protected illicit fishing in equal measure. If there is a will to do this, there will be a way. And the only way we're going to get to having enough will is if we change the definition of what we're trying to do from being about protecting the maritime space against having threats. If we look at it in that way, protecting the waters against having illegal actors, against having illicit state actors, we'll never get there. We have to recognize that we are working together to protect the maritime domain for the enrichment of all of our states and the betterment of life on land. That is what gets us to having a recognition of how to work together and have enough will. So thank you very much for those, the opportunity to share these remarks with you. And I look forward to having a conversation now.
Yes, absolutely. Very well said, Dr. Ian. I hope everyone takes to heart those 7 I's that you just articulated. This concludes the second session, and I now invite Dr. Ian to moderate session 3, the role of parliamentarians in combating fisheries crime. Dr. Ian, you have the floor.
Well, thank you all very much. And I will do my best to not comment too much, having already spoken plenty, but I want to hear from all of you about how we go forward. How do we work together? How do we build this will collectively? And then how do we actually act? So I will, first of all, open up to see if there are any questions immediately for either myself or my predecessors who have spoken. And then we will go delegation by delegation to have an opportunity to each share. So are there any immediate questions before we move through each of the delegations? All right, not seeing any hands raised. I will turn first to Cambodia. I will go alphabetically and ask for you to just share with us any questions, thoughts, or reflections on how we advance the collective interest in the need to not only combat IUU fishing and its impact on sustainability, but these related offenses of fisheries crime that impacts rule of law on land and state-protected illicit fishing, which is a threat to sovereignty and the global order. So Cambodia, to you first, please. The floor is yours.
I thank you very much, Dr. Ian Rabi, for moderating and for your informative presentation. Actually, the topic today we cover the growing challenge of confronting fishery crime in ASEAN is a special, sensitive, and crucial topic to Cambodia, given the subject matter significant to our nation, economy, culture, and livelihood. The fishery sector encompasses approximately 8% of our total GDP. However, despite its history and involvement with fishery, Cambodia also continue to be eroded by a multitude of challenge and obstacles it needs to overcome. Cambodia, as in unison with other East Asia and Pacific nations, have faced a value loss of around $850 million a year due to fishery crime. And as noted by the FAO, the majority of illegal marine fishery involved has likely occurs along national border as well as an region under international jurisdiction. recalling a case back in October 2017. A mysterious bug freighter carrying weapon named the Jason, which has sailed from North Korea, was falsely flying the Cambodia flag, was apprehended along the Suez Canal by Egyptian official. And any ship claimed by under Cambodia flag after 17 August 2016 would of course be considered illegal and be subjected to applicable international law and regulation, as Cambodia has already terminated its contract with International Ship Registry of Cambodia to safeguard the reputation and honor of Cambodia flag. This case is the prime example of occurring illegal activity, which also include fishing without jurisdiction to IUU related fishery, which has contributed to numerous environmental, social, and economic setbacks, including the loss of natural habitat and the human rights abuse within the fishing industry. In Cambodia, we have adopted various countermeasures on the international level. We fully acknowledge and support the agreement on the port state measure to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and affirm our commitment by ratifying the agreement for the implementation of provision of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea of 10 December 1982 related to the conservation and management of straddling fish stock and highly migratory fish stock on 18 January 2020. And Cambodia also endorsed the regional plan of action to promote responsible fishing practice, including combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in October 2007. And more recently, the ASEAN Guideline for Fishery Development of Southeast Asia on preventing the import of fishery products from illegal and unauthorized fishing activity into the supply chain in 2015. And likewise, and domestically, Cambodia has further affirmed its commitment to rectifying the management of its marine fishery activity by building upon the aforementioned international and regional document in its introduction of a 5-year national action plan to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated marine fishing by our Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fishery in June 2020. And the plan was introduced to specifically target a number of conflicts, including IUU fishing in the international arena, removing trade barrier with the international community, promoting the national and international economy, as well as receiving technical and financial assistance from national and international development partners for the implementation of our national plan. And furthermore, to ensure the sustainable protection and management of its fishery resource as a source of nutrition, a key economic development asset, and a coach in improving living standard, Cambodia in the process of updating its current fishery law by building upon the foundation of the IUU related principle and strategy it established. And this principle most noticeably include sustainable development, the implementation of good governance, and the adaptation of international best practice, as well as a relevant strategy with emphasis the call for appropriate infrastructure to enforce illegal fishing prevention and evidence-based management approach for a more sustainable fishery ecosystem. In conclusion, I would like to express my sincere appreciation and support the presentation made by Dr. Marzuki Darusman, as well as your presentation, Dr. Ian Rabi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just to validate one of your early comments about the use of the Cambodian flag in some of these issues, it was actually possible because of a criminal organization to register a vessel that did not exist in the Cambodian flag, even though the Cambodian flag registry was closed up until about 2 years ago. That online criminality was such that you could actually get a false Cambodian flag certificate. And I was actually in Phnom Penh shortly after the August 17th, 2016 closure of the registry. And we discussed how to maybe approach this, but it was very, very difficult. And congratulations to Cambodia for the work it has done on trying to close down that opportunity. But it shows just how resilient some of the criminal organizations are. So let me now invite Indonesia. Indonesia, the floor is yours for your comments.
Okay, I'll take the opportunity. Thank you.
I think we may have lost our colleague from Indonesia for the moment. Would any of the other Indonesian delegation wish to speak at the moment? Or we can move on and come back.
Yeah, sure. I can say a couple of words from Indonesia, if that's okay.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning and probably evening for some of you. It's great to be a part of this lively discussion. I'd like to extend my regards also to the Secretary General of AIPA. We've met a couple of times online, and it's really great to see you here as well. And of course, ICCF, James, it's good to meet you virtually. Hopefully we'll get to meet in person. And Pak Bobi, who is now online, actually, he's back, one of the co-chairs of the Ocean Caucus at the Indonesian Parliament. I think I'd like to kind of just stress on a couple of points, but I think probably later we'll be able to discuss more on certain issues that we're currently facing. So I'd like to kind of point out that Indonesia is, a maritime country, I would say. We're the biggest archipelago in the world with 17,500 roughly islands. And so, of course, the fishery sector plays a vital and prominent role in the development of our nation, really. And when we speak of the fishery sector, this has created immense opportunity for the Indonesian people, whether it be in the side of job creation, alongside, of course, the multiplier effect that comes with it, how that has helped in terms of the well-being of society in general, how that's contributed to the well-being of society, and how that's increased the purchasing power of the Indonesian people to contribute even more towards the economy. And so, a large portion of the Indonesian people are very much involved within the sector. And so there are a couple of problems that we are facing, and I'm sure my colleague Pak Bobby will say a couple of more words with regards to this, but one of them being, for example, some border disputes in terms of where fishing can occur. So we are, neighboring countries with other countries in the Southeast Asian region. And so there are disputes when it comes to which area is subjected to Indonesia or which is subjected to countries, next to Indonesia. And so this is one of the disputes that we are currently, I think, undergoing. I wouldn't say dispute, but it's a conversation that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs is having with several countries, whether it be the Philippines and also Malaysia. And so this kind of strengthening within the bilateral relations between these countries is also quite important as a solution. And I think as a parliamentarian, we also have a role to play, like discussions today, being able to hear, the inputs and I guess problems arising from other countries, and also how, because I'm also a member of the Inter-Parliamentary cooperation at the Indonesian Parliament. And so we have held conversations with several countries with regards to sustainability issues. It just so happens my focus is more on the energy transition aspect and how we can decrease greenhouse gas emissions within the energy sector, because that contributes around 30% of our total emissions. But I believe that we can also utilize that platform, to strengthen the bilateral relations we have with neighboring countries like Malaysia, like the Philippines, when it comes to the border, right? The border disputes or issues that may arise. And also, I think the next thing that I feel needs thorough attention, and I think my colleagues from Commission 4 can comment more on this because they deal directly with the fisheries sector and also the environmental sector, is how we can really just make sure that their well-being is maintained in a way that what they are able to reap from their fishing activities is not only useful for the local economy, right, but also in terms of how much they actually gain from that activity, right? And so we're trying to make sure that these I don't know why I can't seem to remember the English term for this. Pak Bobby, nelayan, apa sih? So, how we can really just make sure that their livelihood is also maintained at a level where they can also contribute to the economy. It's the same thing that we face within the agricultural sector. I think certain commodities are being sold at such a low price, where the people and the society that are very much contributing towards the sector is not actually gaining enough for them to sustain their own lifestyle or their own life. So I think that also is something that we can kind of talk a little bit more about within the fishery sector in general. So those 2 points is something that I'd like to stress upon, and also sustainability measures, making sure that we are not using tactics that are actually not beneficial for the coral reefs, for example, and the livelihoods of the fish underwater. And this is something that needs to be monitored. I think the Parliament plays a very vital role in monitoring this alongside the government, right? So this check and balance system needs to be in check, needs to take place in order for us to make sure that in the grassroots level, this is being controlled in the most optimum way. So those 3 points is kind of like my thoughts for this morning. And yeah, I'd like to kind of extend to my colleagues from Indonesia. Pak Bobby, silahkan.
Thank you, Dia. Sorry for some technical problem. Okay, I just have some simple question to both our speakers, Professor Marzuki and Dr. Ian. Just a simple question, and I'd like you to answer it in a bold sentences, maybe, about how to end the IUU fishing in a simple way. Because every references that we hear, it's how suffer the world because the IUU, especially the country that had impacted. And even if there's already some coordinations, there's still keep repeat again, should we level up the IUU fishing as a crime, or we should level up as an act of war? Why? Because the development of the security concept from the traditional to non-traditional security implicates that the states, our states, Indonesian, for example, must rely on the multilateral security cooperation, just like a joint patrol in the border, the cooperation between the ports and other treaty. But all of the cooperation also involves the military and non-military action. So in the simple word, to end the IUU fishing, is there any other way to end it in a proper manner, in gentleman manner, or we have to rely on in our own muscles to develop the better security in our border? And we cannot prohibit the non-state actor to pass and don't do the IUU fishing in our territory, but don't get mad if our country takes some preventive action, or if we catch the vessel, or things like that. So in the simple word, is there still a way to end this IUU fishing in proper manner, or we have to level up as an act of war, and we have to have some treaty with our neighbors? So if there's some non-state actor or any flag carrier that back with the states, like the example with some accident, or we should treat this as a crime for several certain time, and if it's not working, the IUU still keep repeating and doing again, we still have to leveling up to the like an act of war, just like in Philippines to combat the narcotics, just like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Professor, would you like to respond in 2 sentences to the simple question posed by Park?
Well, thank you, Pa Ian. I'm just to take. I'm not a professor, actually. I'm just a simple activist that is trying to, with colleagues here, to figure out what would be the best course of action to move forward. And I commend your presentation, Pa Ian, very enlightening, and gives a bit more meat, to the conversation we're having here. Concrete situations on the ground that need to be addressed by all of us, Southeast Asian countries, but more so, of course, regionally and globally. But then to link this to the massive criminal activities that have become more sophisticated, but Bobby has posed a very pertinent question as to how we should go about in addressing this issue. Now, I may have to be forthright about this because I'm not quite persuaded that we can fully rid ourselves of this issue. The best that we could achieve is to massively mitigate the issue, rather than addressing this as a black and white issue of a war against terrorism or a war against narcotics. It is a visual, of course, very useful to imagine that the level of severity does require a very fundamental approach to this issue. Now, illegal fishing in Indonesian waters cover a relatively broad range of fishing activities, of course, that include fishing without a license, fishing without with a fake license, for that matter, fishing with the wrong ship, and fishing in the wrong waters, as mentioned by Ibu just now, before Bobby. Now, I have to say that both Indonesians and foreigners have been involved in this illegal fishing activities. But more to the point, and I'm speaking as an Indonesian for that matter, it is also suspected that these involve military personnel, and that is a challenge to be addressed. But more so in terms of the scale of loss of an estimated $15 billion per year, up to $20 billion per year. It is a massive criminal domain to be exploited by your term nefarious forces. And therefore, it is unimaginable, to be practical, that we can completely do away with this, other than to massively mitigate the incidence of IUU fishing. And that calls for a concerted effort by all the members of ASEAN, not only to look at this as a legal issue, but also as a sustainability matter that links human rights violations, criminality, to a much more comprehensive sustainability approach that goes out from what may be termed as ecological modernization, which calls for not only a control and command, a trade-off approach between economic welfare and profitability of the fish industry, but also to consider the resource as not as a free resource, but to incorporate that into the value chain so that it becomes effective in terms of sustainability and conservation. So that would be my short response to the question, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pokobi, I have to say, anytime I hear someone say that they're about to ask a simple question, I get very nervous, and the nerves were well founded. Your question is huge. If I had the answers, if any of us had the answers, we'd all be in very good shape. But what I will say is to what was just mentioned, as I noted before, these are issues that wouldn't be happening but for human activity. Human beings live on land. That means we need to look to human beings for the answer. And what that requires is that we bring transparency to the entirety of the supply chain. If consumers are unwilling to buy fish that do not have a clear origin, IUU fishing will not be an attractive mode of making money. As long as there is money to be made, this will be a huge problem. And so we need to change the risk-reward calculus for those who would be engaged in IUU fishing by changing the demand for transparency in the fisheries sector. And so that is a policy initiative, that is a marketplace initiative that all of us can participate in. And so we can affect what's happening on the water by the choices we make on land. And so that's the shortest, simplest answer I can give you. But it does require a comprehensive approach where we look at this from whatever standpoint will build the most will to deal with whatever aspect we can deal with. So if it's building consumer will to only buy transparent, traceable fish, that's one aspect. If it's looking at it as a national security issue, given the connections to all kinds of criminal activity and potential terrorism, then we look at it as a national security issue. If we look at it as a money laundering issue for the financial aspects, we do that as well. And so we need to take all the approaches simultaneously so that we can pop the balloon and not just push it from one area to another. That's the best answer I can give you in 30 seconds or less. But I want to offer up the floor to anyone else from Indonesia and see if there are any further comments from Indonesia. All right, barring further comments, terima kasih. I will move on to Laos. Would the delegation from Laos like to speak next? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ian. Good morning, everyone. Honorable Dr. Cheam Yeap, President of Cambodia AIPA National Group, Madam Nguyen Tuat Wan, Secretary General of AIPA, Cheam Yeap, Indonesia Country Director of ICCF, Development Partner Representative, ladies and gentlemen. It is great honor for representatives of Lao delegations from the Lao National Assembly to attend this important meeting on the growing challenge of confronting fisheries crime in ASEAN today. The agriculture sector of the Lao PDR is very important of economic development strategies, employing over 70% of the population in the country. Fishery sector play important role in the national food security, nutrient, poverty, alleviation, and trade. Lao PDR recognize and support on strengthened cooperation in combating IUU fishing under the vision and strategic plan for ASEAN cooperation and in food, agriculture, and forestry since 2016. And the joint ASEAN CIDEC declarations on regional cooperation on fishery combating IUU fishing and enhancing collaboration between ASEAN member states and 11 regional and international organizations in combating IUU fishing. I think not that the world progress of IUU fishing sector has been made since the first ASEAN meeting on combating IUU fishing with the EU held in 4th to 5th April 2019 in Bangkok, Thailand, for the setting up for the ASEAN IUU Task Force. The 27 ASEAN Sectoring Working Group on Fishery on the 27 to 25 June 2019 in Da Nang, Vietnam, have been changed into the ASEAN Network for combating IUU fishing for sharing information and dissemination of best practice among EMS. And the 41 AMAP meeting on the 15th October 2019 in Bandar Seri Begawan, Brunei, Jerusalem, have adopted the concept proposal on the establishment of the ASEAN Network for the combating IUU fishing. In Lao PDR, the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry has responsible for the setting fishery policy, and the Department of Livestock and the Fisheries has responsible for implementing of the policy. The fishery sectors characterized into three components, such as inland fisheries, aquaculture, and processing. The inland fisheries are the most important and contribute excess 2% of the national GDP. The operations of the inland fisheries are very small scale in the nature, with vessels being used on the average by the one or two the pupils. The current key challenge and the common problems of the fishery sectors in Lao PDR are classified into three groups with the following issues. The first, economic problems, include the seasonal increase in production, cost decrease in price, high cost.
It seems we have temporarily lost our colleagues from Lao. While we are waiting for them to come back, might I ask for Malaysia, if Malaysia would like to speak, to take the floor now.
Thank you, Dr. Ian. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I would like to share some suggestions in connection with the subject being briefed and discussed today, growing challenges in confronting fisheries crime in Asia. I would like to contribute some suggestion in terms of, apart from natural breeding of sea creatures, especially those highly sought after commercially, we as human must also make a concerted effort to increase the population of sea creatures by using modern technology in fish breeding, and releasing them to the ocean openly to address the global depletion of sea producers. We as parliamentarians can propose maybe to our respective government to play a role by offering certain incentives to organizations that are willing to participate in this effort, or else enacted a certain law to compel industry players to undertake the initiative. Those fishing organizations cannot simply just harvesting without returning certain investment to harmonize the natural sea environment. So if there were abundance of fish to catch, enough to feed the world population, there would be no need for a dispute over overlapping fishing territory. Encroachment into foreign territory was typically characterized by a decrease in catches in specific area. In our experience in Malaysia, in terms of human rights and labor in seafood industry, based on the natural seafood industry, there is a probability of occurrence on human rights. But so far, until now, our Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency has not found any cases that can be linked to human rights and labor force issues. This due to the difficulties in getting cooperation from the boat crew working on the boat. Based on the integration conducted, all the boat crew worked willingly and they were satisfied with the service provided. The concept of profit sharing between boat owners and boat crew is used by most local boat operators and does not use the concept of employment. This makes the boat crew like a share partner and not an employee. In terms of IUU fishing, is a global. We know that it is a global problem threatening ocean ecosystem and sustainable fisheries. Illegal fishing refers to fishing activity conducted in contravention of applicable laws and regulation. According to our Department of Fishery Malaysia, 6 billion ringgit Malaysia was lost each year as a result of illegal fishing activities. Only 50% of fish caught from national waters make its way to the local market, and the rest are untraceable. As a result of these losses, our Fisheries Act 1985 was amended in July this year, with the aim, among others, increasing the general penalty for the offences. The Fisheries Act increased the maximum penalty for an owner of captain of a foreign vessel caught trespassing into Malaysian waters from 1 million ringgit to 6 million ringgit, and the penalty for every crew members from 100,000 to 600,000 ringgit Malaysia. The offense can be committed by local fishermen and foreign fishermen. Offenses can, under the Fisheries Act, are among the many offenses committed by Maritime Committee, especially fishermen. These offenses can also be linked to organized crime group, for which are committed by syndicate groups. From the statistic recorded by our Malaysian Maritime Enforcement Agency, there was an increase in the number of arrests from 2016 to 2019. However, in 2020, there was a drastic decrease due to the effect of pandemic COVID-19 and deportation methods employed by the government to reduce COVID-19 infection on importers. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And those comments go very much to the point of changing the risk-reward calculus. If it becomes much more risky that you end up paying a fine that is actually calibrated to be meaningful in deterring activity, it changes the choice of engaging in IUU fishing very realistically. So thank you very much, because that is one of the things we are seeing as a successful countermeasure in a lot of places around the world. And congratulations to both Malaysia and MMEA for the work to actually enforce those penalties. So thank you. I have not seen our colleagues from Laos come back on, so I will invite, if Myanmar has joined, I know they were not here at the beginning, but is anyone from Myanmar on? All right, I will turn to Vietnam. If Vietnam would like to comment, please, the floor is yours. Vietnam.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Actually, I was assigned to observe the webinar, and I have no comment on the matter. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I see that Lau has come back on. So please, the floor is yours. I'm sorry that we lost you for a little bit there.
So can you hear me? Because
yes,
we have some technical problem. Sorry for that inconvenience. Thank you very much.
Would you like to conclude any remarks?
Okay, maybe we have some technical problem on the internet. Can I repeat again?
We had very close to, I think, most of what you were saying. So I think if you have any concluding remarks, please.
Okay, thank you. If you are clear, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm now pleased to invite some of our observer delegations. If Belarus has any comments that you would like to make, please, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentations. And the only thing I would like to say that Belarus is a landlocked country, but we have 20,000 rivers and about 10,000 lakes. So fishing is, we also have problems with illegal fishing, and they both damage the nature and the economy of the states, cause damage to the economy of the state, and so we also need to fight this illegal fishing, and but we also have some other problems with because of the dumps and made on the rivers. We have problems with the salmon run, and the eel is not returning to our rivers. So it's more like across the countries, the bordering countries who make these dumps, and well, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. While you said that you are a landlocked country, colleagues of mine in Africa would very quickly correct you in saying that you are a land-linked country, meaning that you are very much connected to the maritime space. Before I turn to Canada, I do want to come back because I understand that our colleagues from Myanmar are here, and I want to make sure I pause sufficiently to give them an opportunity to speak. Would you like to speak Myanmar? Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, I am just only an observer, and therefore I have no comment on this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. To the honourable gentleman from Canada, please. Canada is, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robbie. And if I may say, I was quite fascinated by your presentation. Would it be possible to get a copy of the deck, maybe through Madame Secretary General, along with the minutes of today's meeting? I very much would like to share that with my parliamentarian colleagues across party, and definitely with my government colleagues at Fishery and Ocean Canada. As I mentioned earlier, that the Canada is quite willing to do its part to help ASEAN nations to fight against the IUU fishery. I got to use the terminology more careful nowadays after I hear your presentation. But one question I do have is that the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime described fishery crime as ill-defined. And I had the same feeling when I first got to know, I got to learn a bit about this topic. And how does this lack of a common definition of fishery crime affect the efforts to combat it? And especially in the context of parliamentarians from AIPA, observer parliaments, how can we, is there anything that we can do to raise awareness, or perhaps, taking action on the international stage to help you fight against this phenomena?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I will first see if Dr. Darusman wants to say anything about that before I comment.
Well, just briefly, Ian, I think this goes to the heart of the matter. As we move on to discuss this, I think we are having to every time broaden our perspective to include other aspects or dimensions to this issue. Basically, what seems to be the case is that IUU fishing should be subsumed under an overall fishery policy of a country, but intersecting also with the environmental policy of that country. And these are inseparable aspects in approaching this issue, because at the end, this involves the profitability. I might just bring out this aspect, the capitalistic dimension to fishery industry, and that drives the competition, drives the actions to fish as much as possible, to produce landed fish as much as possible, and that again then affects the fish stocks, if you will. So a simple approach, and this has perhaps been also effective in other areas. I think, to pick up on your point, Ian, I did mention the role of consumers, and this has again similarity to how to combat ivory trade, for example, or other produce that relate to diminishing stocks. And so the consumer has a very central role here, and therefore it would be essential perhaps for regions that have far more developed regulatory frameworks to impose and to somehow try to spread the enforcement of norms to address IUU fishing. So it does entail regional cooperation and collaboration. And one point that goes to the issue of legislation, it does help that if regional actors and member states have common legislation in place, that would facilitate collaboration between member states to combat this matter.
I will just add a very sort of technical point, which is that when you were looking at maritime crime, you have three international crimes under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea: piracy, illegal broadcasting, and slavery. Any country on Earth can interdict any of those three crimes outside of the 12 nautical mile territorial sea. Besides those three, there's only one sort of in-between crime, which is drugs, which because of the Vienna Drug Convention can be interdicted anywhere as long as Article 17 of that convention is followed. Everything else has to be interdicted at the national level. It is a national crime. So fisheries crime as a term is an imprecise term that describes anything that involves a national level crime touching the fishery sector. And that's why it is very inartful in its definition, in that it is describing a general phenomenon that is applicable in lots of different jurisdictions. It is not an international crime per se. There is no convention that defines it. And so what we're actually looking at are how Canada, how Indonesia, how Malaysia apply criminal laws in their maritime domain that touches the fishery sector. And so that's why it is not precisely drafted. What is necessary is to ensure that regardless of the legislation that is in place, there is also the wherewithal to actually enforce the law. So not only is there the law, but there's the capacity, the capability, and the authority and jurisdiction vested in the agencies to go out and do that, backed by political will. And so where I think that this body is probably best suited is helping ensure that there is political will and thus political capital directed towards the enforcement of existing both criminal laws and fisheries regulations to ensure that both the sustainability and the security and law enforcement sides of this issue are equally addressed. And so that would be my answer to that. But though I work for UN Office on Drugs and Crime, I am not operating in that capacity at the moment. So that is my personal view. I must disclaim that. But I thank you for that question. Would you have anything further to say on behalf of Canada?
Thank you very much for those points. I've taken notes and also took a snapshot of your contact information. So you may hear from me in the future should there be a relevant study by the Parliament standing committees, and I'll definitely put you forward as a witness. Thank you.
By all means. Thank you. I turn to Timor-Leste now. Timor-Leste, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your presentation. And in this opportunity, I want to say something regarding our experience as a small country. So we face many problems. According to our data from 2015 until 2020, around approximately 75 illegal fishing vessels each stay in Timor-Leste area. So from this information, we calculate that was equivalent, we lost about 62.5 tons per day. So it means that the small country and the limit of the many things to control maritime that we have. We want to, as a parliament, we support the government to establish bilateral and multilateral and the trilateral with the government, and then how to support Timor-Leste as a small country to control our maritime. So the experience that we have, and we also faced some illegal fishing committed by the national fishermen, and other also some illegal fishing by the foreign fishermen. So that's one the problem that we already face, and I hope maybe from this opportunity we can ask from several countries support that to training our human resource as the principle of the our capacity to strengthen our institution and how to control the illegal fishing in our maritime. As you know, from the presentation, it's not easy to combat illegal fishing because around the world talking about the illegal fishing and the modern equipment, the use. So as a small country, and we just got many experience from your presentation, and we hope we can get the presentation to be considered for our duty as a representative of the people, and encourage our government to ratify some conventions that we already identified that the government must be ratified. For example, Port Artemis Agreement and United Nations Fish Stock Agreement, United Nations Complaints Agreement, International Code of Conduct for Fisheries, membership of regional fishery organizations, and other things maybe as international instrument to be considered and to be used as something that must be we consider it to support the government. And every year we support the government to approve financial to support the government how to enhance their capacity, human capacity, and the institutional capacity to control our maritime as one potential for us to be used for the sustainable development of our country. That's I want to say, and thanks for this opportunity. I hope that we will see in the future, in the short time or in the future meeting, if I and from our side get some invitation from your side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and really appreciate those comments. No matter the size of the country, this is a big issue. So really appreciate that. I believe the honorable gentleman from Indonesia, Pak, has something he would like to share. So please, from Indonesia, the floor is yours.
Hello, hi, Dr. Ian Relby. Can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Thank you very much, sir. And please forgive me that I've been in and out of Zoom meetings, so I'll try to keep my remarks quite short. But first of all, I would like to thank yourself and the Honorable Pak Marzuki Darusman for a very insightful presentation. And again, I'm sorry that I've joined quite late, but just to stress on a few points, and this is touching upon Pak Marzuki Darusman's remarks regarding the inseparability of IUU fishing and conservation. I think I would like to go back in our roles as parliamentarians, and first is the legislative function. just to share, in the Indonesian Parliament, we are currently deliberating and revising the conservation bill, which I believe is very important, very crucial in tackling IUU fishing. When we talk about some of the problems that our conservation areas, especially our forest areas, are seeing these days are destructive economic practices such as illegal mining, expansion of palm oil plantation, which is causing severe degradation of our forest assets. And we find that when we establish or we expand conservation areas, this can help mitigate, it will not resolve the whole issue, but it can help mitigate forest destruction. And I think the same principle can be applied in maritime or coastal areas, conservation areas. So I think this particular bill will be very important going forward, as it incentivizes and it stipulates the need of expanding conservation areas, and it gives the role of local communities living in forest areas as well as coastal areas, the tools to be involved in protecting these areas. So I think in that sense, Pak Marzuki Darusman, thank you for your remark and your stressing on the importance of conservation and IUU fishing. I think those two is very inseparable, just like you said. Secondly, I would like to stress our role as parliamentarians on the importance of the adequate budget for marine conservation and also to combat and tackle IUU fishing. I'll be very interested to know from our colleagues, from our ASEAN colleagues, as well as our distinguished colleagues from Canada and Belarus, to know how much budget is allocated for the fishery sector, for especially to combat IUU fishing. I know, this is a big political will that needs to be undertaken to allocate the adequate budget for programs specifically targeting IUU fishing and marine conservation and protecting these areas. So I think those 2 points I would just like to add on in our discussion. Again, I would like to thank the honorable and distinguished parliamentarians from all over ASEAN and all over the world, and also for Dr. Ian Relby and also Pak Marzuki Darusman for your presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just on the point of budgets, I will say from around the world that we are seeing a major increase in budgets being focused on countering IUU fishing. One really important piece is that if done well, IUU fishing interdiction can actually be cost beneficial to a state. In Senegal, for example, they increased marginally the budget for IUU fishing, and the penalties collected was enough to actually purchase an entire new vessel the following year for increasing their counter IUU fishing approaches. And so maritime law is very strange in the ability to exercise asset forfeiture against fishing vessels. And so not only blowing them up, but also selling them and actually repurposing for any number of approaches can be very beneficial economically to the state. But it is very, very important not to tie the budget to an expected amount of penalties, because if you are changing that risk reward calculus, you should actually be getting fewer and fewer opportunities to arrest vessels each year. And so if you decrease the budget based on a decrease in interdictions, you lose the deterrent effect of having that presence at sea. And so that is one of the challenges that a lot of states are facing at this time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. I want to, in the interest of time, I want to turn to make sure our colleagues from Ukraine have an opportunity to speak. And I want to start by saying I'm very sorry for what your country is facing at the moment. And I think we are all praying for sustained peace. But Ukraine, the floor is yours. Please, any comments are most welcome.
Thank you. Now the situation in Ukraine is peaceful. First of all, we should tell about our pleasure for your beautiful situation or for your beautiful presentation. And question about illegal fishing is touched first of all about the sea barges. From the good side, I should tell that the sea border with Romania was demarcated by International Court in 2009 by International Court in Gaga. For a much more difficult situation is with Russia. The sea border in Azov Sea was never demarcated, and after annexion of Crimea and start of Russian aggression in Ukraine in 2014, we have a lot of problems with the sea areas in Crimea. We can't provide any control around the Crimea, and as we think, all fishing around Crimea is a priori illegal because the sea laws it doesn't work around the Crimea because the annexion of Crimea was really illegal. So we should work and consolidate the world community about our problem, include our sea border, and we should provide the control on fishing in all area of our sea lands.
Thank you very much. Having recently been in Odessa, I can attest to the work of the border guard for actually trying to clarify and maintain international legal principles while dealing with the ever-changing situation. Thank you very much for those comments. Are there any other comments from the floor before we begin to wrap up? I want to make sure everyone has had a chance to speak. Well, barring any further interventions, I turn back over to the chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity to have moderated this discussion. I thank you all for your fantastic contributions to what, to my mind, has been an incredibly productive discussion. So I hope this will lead to incredibly productive action in the coming weeks and months. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jan Ranby. I feel that it's quite interesting to have you to join this webinar as the panelists as well as the moderators. You have done a wonderful job. So thank you very much. Distinguished parliamentarians, ladies and gentlemen, now I'd like to invite Honorable Kitty Sepabindit Cheam Yeap, the first Vice President of the National Assembly of Cambodia, to deliver a closing remark. Floor is yours, Honorable.
Once again, thank you, Madam Nguyen Tu Wan, Secretary General of AIPA. Honorable delegate from AIPA Member Parliament and AIPA observers. Madam Nguyen Tu Wan, Secretary General of AIPA, representative from the International Conservation Caucus Foundation, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We now come to the end of our interactive and fruitful webinar, which I have found to be filled with important and constructive input as well as valuable insight. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the distinguished delegate from AIPA Member Parliament and all participants for your active participation and fruitful discussion on how to effectively address our common problem on fishery crime. Today's successful convening in the virtual briefing reflect the strong commitment of AIPA Member Parliament and all stakeholders to combating illegal maritime activities in the fishery industry. We include, but not limited to, illegal fishing, human rights abuse, human trafficking, and labor exploitation, which is detrimental to marine resource and ecosystem livelihood and well-being, as well as security and peace. As we all have known, maritime crime become more transnationally organized. Therefore, coordinated effort, close cooperation, effective law enforcement. This law enforcement and effective policy action are needed to deal with this pressing issue. I believe that as lawmakers, we have an important role and responsibility in addressing the illegal maritime crime through the adoption of legal instruments and monitoring and evaluation of the effectiveness of law enforcement. We look forward to working more collaboratively with all members and partners to tackle the issues and to transform our region into the region of sustainable peace, development, and shared prosperity. To conclude, I would like to stress that the webinar on the growing challenge of confronting fishery crime in ASEAN was held with great insight, fruitful input, and great success. Finally, I would like to wish His Excellency, dear colleagues, and distinguished participants good health and renewed success in your endeavors. I now formally declare the conclusion of our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Cheam Yeap. To close this webinar, I just want to say a few words. I'd like to especially thank Honorable Cheam Yeap, all parliamentarians of AIPA member parliaments, as well as observer parliaments, for your time and very active participation. I'm especially grateful to our two panelists for your excellent and insightful presentation. Last but not least, I would like to express my thanks to all the people behind the scene, including the AIPA ICCF Secretariat, as well as AIPA Member Parliament Secretariat, for your contribution, for your effort to make this webinar a reality. And after this meeting, we will send the presentation of our two panelists, as well as the document to all AIPA Member Parliament, as well as the observer parliaments. So I wish all of you stay safe and healthy, and I look forward to seeing you again in all AIPA future meetings. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Go. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah.
Bye. Thank you for all.
Thank you.